Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. And if you're looking to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 19 of Breaking Step. Tibbs sensed the guards posted around the house, four of them, not quite hidden from view. If their goal was to catch him getting in, they were doing a poor job of it. If getting in was his intent, they were just warning him of where they were paying attention. Of what they were paying attention. What they were paying attention to. It would make it harder, but just like he'd picked this allocation on the a location on this roof, they okay, it would make it harder, but just like it picked the location from this room, okay, but just like how he picked a location on this roof, they couldn't where they couldn't see him because he knew where they were, he'd be able to get in when they looked away. Not that he needed to be inside the house to teach those two not to take advantage of their charges. He used air to pull the conversation through the wall to him, followed their movement through their essence. As faint as it was, he followed the same it followed the same channels as it did in Tibs. So he could tell when one raised an arm and the swift motion connected with the Omega. He couldn't stop it, but he could make the following moments bad enough. That person, for that person to bad enough, that person would believe luck was a thing and it had been stolen from them. He used air and a basket tripped them. Fire made the pot's handle so much hotter than they expected. Lighting a candle caused a flame that singed their face. The bucket of water was too hot to wash themselves with. Their meal always cold when it should be hot. Their ale too hot to be enjoyed. Tibbs sacrificed his other work, and he had to apply weaves of purity over himself to deal with the exhaustion. Those weren't as efficient as suffusing himself, but after 6 days, neither dare raise their hand against the Omegas under their care anymore. There were others who took advantage, and Tibbs would deal with them in time, but this couple had been the worst, and when he finally slept, he slept quite well. Tibbs studied what the stall lining the now fully paved path offered, as well as the Omegas passing by. This was the second day the guild had let them go in. He'd missed the first one because he'd slept through it. What he heard of the result was as he expected. Few of the runners came out. The one difference he saw on those now waiting their turn was the lack of a confused expression that had been so prevalent in Tibbs's early days running the dungeon. At least they had been told what to expect. They were called, were handed their equipment, and put on a team. They followed instruction, then waited. Stowe stayed silent, for which Tibbs was grateful. He didn't want to know how poorly they were doing. Seeing the team sent up without one exiting was enough. The expressions he saw in the Omegas were a mix of fear, bravado, determination, and resignation. Bravado and resignation wouldn't help them survive, and Tibbs hoped their failures didn't drag the rest of the team down with them. He spied an Omega at a booth displaying swords and shield and stepped next to her. He nodded to the man. He assisted at the Sharp Edge shop on Merchant Row. Can I ask a question? It's for her. Tibbs added at the man's surprised expression, but I'd rather no one noticed me. No, I'd rather no one noticed. Me? She asked, confused, looking at him. Might be best if you check the weight of this shield, miss, the man said, handing her one smaller than the one she'd been looking at. What did he tell you about the rules of the runs? Tibs asked, taking a short sword and studying its edge. Rules? She held the shield with both hands and didn't seem to know what to do with it. To help each other survive. Did they say anything about how far you need to go? He sensed the metal of the blade. Like all the shops on Merchant Row, it was a good quality. It was good quality. But now that he had metal, he could tell the difference that would let one keep an edge better than the other, or one that might snap under strain where a better made one would continue to hold. No, she hesitated, turning the shield in her hand and raising it to look at the bow in an imitation of how Tibs had looked at the length of the sword. They said we need to reach the end to make it to the other floor so we can graduate. Tibbs changed for a slightly longer one. You don't have to finish the floor on your first try. If you don't think your team can survive the room, you can turn around and try again on the next one. She stared at him. How do you know that? He's one of the first to have gone in, the merchant said. He's Tibbs Lightfinger. Tibbs stifled a sigh. There wasn't any chance any the new runners wouldn't call him that. They didn't tell us anything. We had to discover the rules as we went. You don't graduate by reaching the end of the floor. You graduate by surviving until you're strong enough. He didn't add what for. He expected the Omegas had worked out adventurers had element, and that this was how it happened. But he didn't know how the guild would react if one of them outright told them that. Tibbs wasn't worried about what Irdian might do to him, but he didn't put it past the man to make the Omega pay for the infraction in his stead. He looked at her. What that means is that you need to walk out that door each time, even if you're the only one doing it. The man tripped as soon as he took a step, after grabbing his charge and yanking her away from the other Omegas she'd been speaking with. He stood and glared at those laughing, blood flowing from his broken nose. He angrily reached for the girl, and his foot slipped out from under him, and his face hit the ground. The guard glared at Tibbs, who shrugged. How could he be responsible? It wasn't like he could control what the ground did. His element was water. Everyone knew that. Unless Irdian came in person or put adventurers on Tibbs, he would be able to keep this going until all the caretakers learned to handle their charge with care. Or the Omegas graduated to Upsilon and either moved to the rooming houses with their team or became capable of keeping those people in their place on their own. Tibbs looked at the mess he'd made of the crust. If he was right, once he was done with the next sequence, the dragon would be formed and the door unlocked. This puzzle had stolen enough of his confidence in his skill that at them he wasn't certain he was right. He glanced at the time shield. If he was wrong or made a mistake in how he followed the sequence, he wouldn't have the time to redo it. He wasn't even certain he'd have the time needed to go through the sequence and leave them enough time to tackle the room. Tibbs? Jekyll asked, and he gave the fighter a nod before focusing. He turned piece after piece, following the sequence. Cracks formed through the ice as he fought the need to go faster, give his team more time with the room. Haste could undo all his work. The last piece turned into place and the click came. Tibbs sagged with relief, and Jekyll pulled him away from the rising door. Nothing happened, but it had been stupid of him to stay there. This could have been the room where Ganny placed a trap ready to pounce as the door opened. Instead of a room, they looked at a corridor, 3 paces wide at a glance, with a line across the floor 3 paces in, and another one after that, and again. There would be another one after that, but Tibbs couldn't make it out, and the essence that made out the floor was too different for him to be able to work out that kind of detail through the masmia that was everywhere on this level. The walls and floors were so white it reminded Tibbs of the building in Mountain Sea. There it had been the sun shining on them that made them brilliant. Here, Stoa simply made them that bright of a white. What are they? Jekyll asked, standing at the threshold. That isn't stone. Don't. Tibbs warned as the fighter went to touch it. He pushed the exhaustion away with a quick weave of purity and stepped forward, looking and sensing inside the room. Now that he focused on it, Tibbs could tell there was little earth essence in the weave that made the surface. In fact, it was so tight that he got little more than an impression of the essences it was made of. There was some of each of his element and more. Corruption flew past the two of them and hit the wall. Instead of dripping, it moved along in what reminded Tibbs of a hand feeling a surface for differences that would reveal a hidden panel. It's resistant to corruption, Don said. Like the rest of the dungeon, Mez replied. No, this is different. Everywhere else, it's woven into the stone as an afterthought, the dungeon reacting to an attack, the way an animal reacts after surviving a trap. I can feel around those threads, and if I had to, I'm confident I could undo at least some of them. Told you that's what he was doing, Snow said triumphantly. Don continued to move the essence on the wall. This is purposeful. It's more advanced than anything I've read, but with how tightly it seems woven, I'd say this is so no one essence can interact with the wall. And with that in mind, if we wanted to attempt to do something to them, we'd need 24 runners, each with a different element working as one. Okay, Kenny said. I didn't think anyone would work out that part. Why 24? Jekyll asked. That's how many elements there are, Don replied, the sneer slipping into his voice. Didn't you know that? Don fell silent, then mumbled, Sorry. That many? Jekyll looked at Commodore. I am unsure why you would expect me to be able to corroborate Don's statement. You mean that in all that traveling you've done, Jekyll said, smirking, you didn't learn everything there is to know about the elements? Don studied the cleric surreptitiously, or tried to, Tibbs expected. Only Jekyll and Maz would miss that look. I am amused that you still keep trying to get me to admit to something I made clear I have no interest in discussing. But no, my traveling was geared toward learning what it meant for me to be a cleric of darkness, not investigate all there might be to know about the elements. I leave those types of inquiries to those better suited for them. He smiled, leveling his gaze at Dawn and causing the sorcerer to hurriedly look away. So we can't undo the wall, Mezes said, which means going through whatever the corridor's about. It's a room, Tibbs said, looking at the corridor. Looks like a corridor to me, Jekyll said. The other two were rooms. This is going to be a room. He looked at Don. The sorcerer snarled. You want? He shook himself and confidence returned. I agree with Tibbs. The previous two crests revealed rooms, so this will be one too. The dungeon is predictable that way. Each floor has a style and maintains it. This one is the most different, but it still has one. It combines physical trials with mental one. Each crest has been a type of scattered puzzle, and we had to figure out the rules that move the pieces to complete them. Let me guess, Jekyll said derisively. You'd have worked them out on your own. Of course. Dawn straightened, while Tibbs and Mez glared at the fighter, goading their sorcerers. Dawn looked at them and sunk in slightly. I'm pretty sure that given time, I'd have managed it. They're complex puzzles, but it's always possible to think your way through those. But it's clear Tibbs is more adept at solving them. You've got that. That's enough, Tibbs stated. Don is trying to work with us. Stop prodding him. Jekyll looked at him, surprised and hurt, while Don's surprised expression was tinted with suspicion. Tibbs glanced at the time shield. They so didn't have time for this. Stay here. He stepped into the corridor, and nothing happened. He studied the floor and walls. The weave went 3 paces under him, then he sensed normal stone. There was no difference in his sense of the weave within the floor and walls that would make him think a trigger was hidden, but this was so different that he wasn't sure he'd know what a trigger would feel like. He stepped to the line of the floor and crouched to study it. A groove in the floor instead of 2 blocks abutting. There was one where the wall met the floor, but as far as his sense told him, all this was one massive weave. It had to be wrong. The line on the floor went up the walls and the ceiling, roughly 3 paces above him. It was easy to miss and wasn't there at all to his sense, but he decided this division had to play a part in how the room worked. He stepped over the line. Again, nothing happened. At the next groove in the floor, he found the corresponding one going up the wall to the ceiling. It divided each of the corridor into a 3 pace by 3 pace block. Anything? Don asked. He was tempted to push the wall to test his idea, but did he have the time to deal with what might trigger? I think the walls are a series of blocks. It might be possible to move them. The floor? Jekyll asked. I don't think so. The ceiling? Don asked, and Tibs looked up again. He couldn't take for granted that holding in place meant they couldn't move, but he sensed normal stone 3 paces above them. I think it's like the floor. I can lift you, so stay there, Tibs told the fighter as he noticed something. He stepped to the left until he nearly touched the wall. There's a turn 6 blocks ahead. That makes this room bigger than the one where we played Conquest, Don said. It was bigger already, Tibbs replied. Those were closer to 2 paces across. I think this is going to be larger than the shifting floor room. Do you think it's going to be a maze, the way the entire floor is one? The sorcerer asked. Tibbs shrugged and stepped over the next line. Nothing happened. He made it halfway across the block when the floor shook to the sound of stone groaning against stone. He turned and watched Jekyll and Dunn step away as the left wall slid across the door. Tibbs ran, but the entrance was blocked before he reached it. And that concludes chapter 19 of Breaking Step. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter is going to be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the story, it is up on Royal Road for free. If you want to support me, my Patreon is about 20 chapters ahead of Royal Road. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the notes. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.